an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Wizards at War, the remainder of the very long Chapter 13. In this section, one of our crew appears to have sacrificed himself for real for the cause. And I am impressed, I am unhappy, but also hopefully he's actually dead? Weird, I know. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Yama for commissioning this episode. Yama, if you are out there, how you doing? So, yeah, this episode is a bit of a bummer. Well, I'm saying this episode, the remainder of this chapter. This is pretty intense. I don't think that I expected shit to get this real at this point, because we've still got another section remaining. And actually, the way that it was broken down, I believe that Jacob has it so that I would be covering the next two chapters for the next episode. And then for the episode after, I'll be covering the final chapter of this book and the first chapter of the next book, which that is not the first time that's happened with this particular series, because of like how hard it is to sort of break things down the way that it's written and the way that the chapters are organized. So I just wanted to give people a heads up about that, like ahead of time. But the fact that there is 3 chapters remaining is what kind of had me going, wait, we're doing this already? Like, I just really thought that we had a bit more time before shit began to truly hit the fan. And since we've got a couple more chapters, I'm looking at this. No, there's only 2 more chapters. So maybe I misread what Jacob said. But because there are 2 more chapters, I'm like wondering exactly what we're going to get for the remainder of this. Because, you know, the whole thing is that what the Lone Power has been up to affects a lot of things at the same time. So we have plenty of room for the storytelling of different areas and how things are being resolved around our friends. So all that to say that I was caught really off guard by how intensely by the Lone One's like involvement at this point in the story. So there is this like the start of this is from they took a step forward and vanished, which is where I stopped on the last one. And our friends are bringing Memeki to see the like hatching nurseries, and they're trying to sort of get her to recognize the truth of her situation and accept her place as the Hesper. And it's a very interesting, because like it took me a moment. I say it took me a moment, but that's not even true. It took the Lone One specifically saying what was happening here before I really understood the significance of it. I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, so I'm going to pull back a bit, but I will come back to that moment. So we have Carmela joining them, and for some reason, and I don't know if I misunderstood something she said, or not even misunderstood, because it turns out I did understand. But did anybody else reading, when she said something about a manual, did anyone else think that she had actually become a wizard? Because I was never under that impression. And I feel like it was meant to be a little bit of a trick on the reader as well, but I might be misreading that a little bit. So she is talking to Kit, and he is extremely agitated about the fact that she apparently has become a wizard at this point in her life without having gone through an ordeal. And again, they're starting off with this like conversation, and I'm like, why does he think that she is a wizard? Like, that's not actually ever been said. She hasn't done any magic, although I guess one could say that like getting to the point where you can travel here technically is kind of magic. Like, I wouldn't be mad at characterizing it that way, but yeah, he is really like almost territorial about being a wizard and not wanting her to horn in on that. And I was a bit surprised at how transparent he is. It's sort of it's a pretty immature response. And considering how mature we have seen Kit and Nita be able to be about extremely heavy shit, I was surprised at how obvious he's being, that he essentially just doesn't want her horning in on his shit, you know? So he says, you haven't had anything that looks like an ordeal. Oh yeah? Well, you haven't had you for a little brother all these years. It's felt pretty ordealish to me. I don't mean that kind of ordeal. Wizardry doesn't just get passed out on street corners to just anybody who comes along. Which, like, Kit, that's, like, really shitty to say, honestly. Like, you're implying that she doesn't deserve it the way that you deserve it. And again, it turns out she's not even a wizard, so this doesn't wind up being hugely relevant. But, like, the attitude he's giving her here, what the fuck, man? And she doesn't really call him on that specifically, but that was what kept coming through to me, you know? Oh yeah, like I need this experience to learn that. You should hear yourself go on and on about it. Suffer, suffer, pain, pain, responsibility, responsibility. She waved her hands in exaggerated distress. Not like you're not having insane and crazy fun secretly every minute of the day. I love her so intensely. Can I just say, like, I just love Carmela forever. And she is correct. And she should be louder about it. So this is when he says, I want you to read the first page. Open the manual and read the first page. So she does. In compliance with FCC Regulations Part 15, Section 209C, which states that any unwanted RF emissions from an intentional radiator shall not exceed the level of the... What? Right here. The first page. I said I found the manual for the TV. And Kit says, have I ever told you how wonderful you are? And then he starts like thanking the universe that she's not a wizard. Again, I say, Kit, what the fuck? Like, no, but genuinely. Like, everything about being a wizard is about helping one another maintain the balance and keep things rolling in the direction of life and truth and happiness and peace. And yet, he's like celebrating the fact that he doesn't have somebody else joining him on that journey. Your priorities are fucked up, bruh. I'm just saying. Like, what the fuck? So anyway, it's eventually, like I said, he says thank you and she thinks that he's saying it to her, but I don't think it's to her. A little bit late, but better late than never. You thought I was talking about a wizard's manual? I don't need a wizard's manual. I'm just fine the way I am. You can check that with the power thingies. I love it so much. So they're continuing down, and Nita notices all of us are like heading into this place. And we've never even asked the question that in a different situation would be the like main thing on our minds, which is, how do we get out of here? And I never thought about the fact that they haven't planned for that. But once that was mentioned, I was like, oh, I don't like this at all. So they stopped outside an arched doorway. On the wall to either side of it was written in the Yaldiv charactery, Grubbery 14. Memeki slipped past Nita, went to the doorway. Inside, in the dimness, nothing moved. Nita could dimly see a central pit area that heaved gently with many, many small caterpillarish forms. On the far side, past the main pit, were many smaller archways, each big enough to take a single entering Yaldiv. Slowly, farther down the corridors, other Yaldiv began to appear. Workers, mostly, heading toward the door of the Commorancy to make their way out into the world. Memeki stood quiet. All of them were looking at her now, but she seemed oblivious to this. And this, like, guys, she stands there and Nita is thinking to herself, just say yes, that's all it needs. I will not, Memeki said. I will not go in. I am no longer of the city. Guys, when she said I will not, I truly thought, as everybody did in that moment, I'm sure, I truly was like, oh my God, she's rejecting her role. Oh shit. If she does that, then what happens? Like, you know? But then, I will not go in. I am no longer of the city. I am the Hess. And from the dim silence of the grubbery, the warriors came boiling out. So, when I said earlier that I didn't get something until basically the lone power completely spelled it out for me, what I was talking about was this moment, because it felt timed so that she would be interrupted. However, I couldn't understand what the significance was of interrupting her now when she's free to say it later, and she starts to. It turns out that the thing is, because the Lone One cuts off magic from this area, she isn't able to say the words in a way that connects to the powers, so her accepting it is inert and no longer matters. Which feels pretty fucked up to me. And the whole thing with him cutting off magic in general, I didn't even know that, like, the Lone Power was allowed to do that. And I really just... This is extremely upsetting in a way that these books have not done yet. And I rather liked it, to be honest. This is something that I always appreciate. And it's something that a writer has to be super, super patient to make happen in a satisfying way. But when you set up a world and you have book after book, the same reality, the same sorts of expectations being set up and met, one book after the other. And then you suddenly have a book where that's not how it works anymore. That is such a great way to get your readership to stop and go, wait, what? And like I said, it takes a certain amount of patience, because as a writer, you have to be willing to allow certain things to be successful for a while before causing some problem and letting the routine kind of the previous books sort of line up and serve you in that moment. And I don't think, were I in the position of like actually finishing anything I've started writing, that I would have this kind of patience, because you do have to sort of know within yourself that you've got the other books in you you have to be sure that you've got more of a story to tell to get here in the first place. And understandably, a lot of writers aren't like aware they're embarking on the writing of a series when they start. You know, that's like sort of a modern thing, I think, that people will embark on writing a series and intend for it to be a series out of the gate, because we have started to understand the importance of people connecting to characters and the comfort of coming back to a familiar world and familiar people. But that wasn't really how it worked a lot of the time. And so I think that people would sort of like shoot their whole shot in their first book and then not have things set up necessarily to be effective in this sort of way for later on. And that's not to say you can't like pull things together and still pull this off, even if you didn't intend for there to be a series. But you know what I'm saying? It's probably easier if you have a plan in mind already that you're going to have a certain number of books before XYZ happens. That's like a major thing that flies in the face of what you've set up for this universe to be like the rules here. Or alternatively, I guess you could just have this thing work all the time and then not really think of it that you want to have the rules no longer apply until you get to like book 7, you know, that could also be the thing. But this moment where everything that is magic no longer works is just extremely jarring. So I'm going to read this part. Harsh claws seized them from every side, snatching everything they had been holding, including the suddenly revealed spear of light from the shocked and swearing Ronan. The breath went right out of Nita, not so much from the horror of 2 giant bugs each grabbing one of her arms, but because of something much more innately awful. Ever since Nita had begun to practice the art, the rule had been, a spell always works. But suddenly it didn't. There was a certain amount of noise. When Spot was pried out of her arms, Doreen joined Ronan in struggling hard and yelling words that would have given their dad a heart attack if he'd heard them. And this is when Nita looks over at Carmela, who waggles her eyebrows and glances towards her curling iron holster, and it's empty. And in that moment, my feeling was like, why is she waggling her eyebrows if they took it away? And later on, when he is trying to sort of like control Carmela, all of a sudden it came to me. I was like, oh my God, she's not actually being controlled and she fucking has that shit. And she waggled her eyebrows to signal like, it looks like they got everything, but they didn't. So, like, her not being under control wasn't as big a surprise as I think it was meant to be, but it still was surprising in that she had enough control to, like, pull the trigger and start shit. And it winds up, like, that weapon has gone bye-bye. So it's not the answer to everything. But I'm not mad at the fact that I kind of saw that coming, because it was still so satisfying. Because apparently the fucking lone one didn't see it coming. So that's all we really give a shit about, right? So as they passed various astonished-looking workers and handmaidens and were hauled downward into the heart of the city, in the back of Nita's mind she could feel the Paradexis struggling as desperately as a bird clutched in someone's fist. What's happening? Why isn't anything working? The Lone One's now fully occupying its avatar here, and it's locally damped down every secondary wizardly function. The only powers fully functioning are those that have possessed wizardry or the power behind it from their very beginnings. And Nita is trying to recite the words of a self-defense spell here. And for some reason, this is the most heartbreaking part for me. This, I don't know why, guys, but this like really got to me. She opened her mouth, started to recite it, and couldn't find the words. Or rather, she knew what they were, but as she whispered the first one, it didn't make sense. It was just a nonsense word. The universe didn't get quiet to listen to it. She said the second word and the third, and they were nonsense. No power to them, nothing magical at all. And there is something about that in particular that I find disturbing in a way that just not remembering wouldn't have accomplished. If she just didn't remember the word, I can assume the word works somewhere still. I can assume that magic is existing and it has been taken from her specifically somehow. And we know that magic is being taken from them specifically because of the way that the Lone One has locked things down. But because of the overall threat to the knowledge and belief in magic and how her, seniors, she goes to visit them and they don't remember what they do anymore and they don't believe it anymore. The fact that she's trying and can't believe as she's doing it felt like the beginnings of her faith being taken away rather than the magic itself being taken away. Taking the magic away feels cruel, but feels also like still there's hope out there somewhere. Taking away her belief in the function of it is a totally different thing, especially because she has enough awareness left to recognize that she's lost it. Carl and Tom they have been so wiped of memory, they don't realize what they've lost. They don't even really understand. They don't remember and they don't know. And to a degree, that's a blessing. But Nita is standing here with the full awareness and memory of what she was able to do. And it's not only not working, it doesn't feel like it should work. And that's so much worse. You know what I mean? It reminds me kind of so I'm going to bring up the fucking Polar Express. Forgive me, guys. But the whole thing with the Polar Express, at least in the movie, I will confess I have never read the book, although I am kind of wanting to own it. But the movie is like a fucking nightmare, so don't watch it. But in the movie, the whole thing is that our friends are losing faith in Christmas and that Santa is real. And they get brought to the North Pole to meet Santa and see that it's all real, to renew their faith before it runs out completely. And they are given little tokens to remember. And one of the things he's given is a bell from the sleigh, from Santa's sleigh. And he rings it, and it doesn't, the first time that he hears he sees the sleigh bells, they aren't actually making any sound for him. And everybody's talking about how beautiful the sound of the bells are, and he can't hear it, and he doesn't understand why. So eventually his faith comes back around. He begins to believe again, and he hears the bells, and that's why he asks for one as his token. And when he returns home, the bell is under the tree, wrapped up, waiting for him. And his parents take it out of the box and try to ring it, and they can't hear it. And they apologize to him for somebody giving him a broken present. But he can hear it. And his sister can hear it. And later he mentions how his sister grew up and eventually she couldn't hear the bell anymore either. That loss of something that you used to believe is at the heart of what terrifies me about getting older and about our willingness to accept the bare minimum in society as well. We have such grand ideas about how people should be treated and what should be available, and then we grow up and act as if the belief in caring fundamentally about people's well-being is silly and childish. And that belief is ground so completely out of people that they can't even connect to where that compassion used to come from anymore. Do you know what I'm saying? And this moment here of like knowing it worked at one time, but now as she's saying them, it's not even like, you know, I'm saying abracadabra. It should be working. Why isn't it working? She's saying abracadabra and then going, abracadabra? The fuck is that? That doesn't even mean anything. I can't, like, guys, this got to me. I don't know, like, this just felt so personal somehow. It felt so much more like, it felt like the acceleration of something that could happen in life, but happening within a minute rather than a lifetime, you know? It's like fucking, what's her name in the Narnia book saying like that she does, oh, you remember the game that we used to play about Narnia? It's so funny that you still play that game, that kind of thing. So she has this moment of despair, but it says it didn't last. She'd been in a similar situation not long ago, a place and time in which no solution seemed possible. While there, she'd learned that sometimes if you just keep doing whatever you could, something would change in your favor. And that is honestly the like way I tend to operate. And that doesn't mean that I don't lose hope sometimes. But in comparison to some of my friends or my husband, I've realized that I'm much more of an optimist. And that comes from me having, in a lot of ways in my life, really good luck. And I will be honest about that. We talk about people being born a certain way, being an optimist or pessimist, and maybe like some of that is true. But I do think that if you've managed to like watch your life come around and like improve more than once, you start to think that's how it works. And I feel like I've been lucky enough to be in that position. So I consistently, even when things are really bad, I really believe in my gut it has to get better, though. It's just going to. It can't be this bad forever. And I wish I could like bottle that faith and give it to people, because I don't know where it even comes from. Like I said, it's probably partially just life experience and partially just a genuine belief that like the worst thing can't be the only thing. But that moment for her and just realizing, you know what? This is fucked up and I'm scared, but I've been scared in fucked up situations before. And it kind of feels like the author sort of acknowledging us as readers as well, you know, being like, you guys know they've been here. They've done this sort of shit. And I'm going to acknowledge that so that it doesn't feel that their despair or their fear is like incredibly out of proportion. Because to a point, if you have been down a certain road more than once, there is only so much absolute panic and despair that you can summon when you get brought down that same fucking road yet again. So she's thinking about what could be possible here. And the paradoxis is like, I can't do anything. I'm really sorry. And Anita is like, well, how are you even still there? I exist. I'm simply of no use. And Nita says, for the moment, you're keeping me sane. You're proof that wizardry's been real, even if it's not working right now. And I really appreciated that, you know, that there isn't a moment of Nita just having to stop and go, am I certain I could ever really do any of that? Because the paradoxis is in her head. Now, granted, that could be part of like the delusion, but I'm really glad we don't have to sit through that. So Kit is like, the two of them are exchanging a look, and it becomes clear to both of them they're each trying to hear one another's thoughts, and even that is not working right now. And Darine says Spot has gone mute and his eyes and legs are gone. Pop his screen, Kit said. See if you get any manual functions. And they all try to summon their manuals, and it is not working. The closest Darine can get is that she can power it on, and there is a screen and software, but there isn't a way to actually access the proper manual functions, and he doesn't have contact with his people back on that planet either. Everything has been cut off. Even the charm bracelets and like Rashawn has a moment of like holding his hand out the way that he does to summon it normally, and that does nothing. So Kit says, we're supposed to become useless now because we think we're marooned, completely isolated, and totally powerless. Forgive me if I don't feel like cooperating. What can we do? Listen, I love this so much. That, like, the wording of that. We're supposed to feel this way. I'm not going to cooperate with that. Is a real fucking mood. I love it. I love it so much. And then the what can we do? That's the attitude. Because sometimes the options that you wish you had are simply not there. And you have got to figure out what options you do have and keep it fucking moving. And it's like I said, it's not going to be what you want. It's not going to be the ideal, but it's better than just standing still and being like, this isn't fair, because it's not fair. You're right. Now what? You know? I mean, I hate that. Don't get me wrong. The fact that life isn't fair will never stop being abhorrent to me. It just should be. It should be fair. What the fuck? It really should. There's no reason for it not to be, really. Except that we just, like, as human beings have decided to sort of ruin things for ourselves. But, yeah, what can we do? That's the vibe. So they move away from the door, and the arch-votary comes through, they being the warriors. And the arch-votary does this whole, like, come and be judged. Rashawn lifted his head and gave the arch-votary an inexpressibly haughty look. Killed, perhaps, he said, but your dark master has neither authority nor right to judge us. Therefore, stand away, lackey, and keep silent in the presence of your betters. I never thought that I was going to enjoy Rashawn's fucking attitude, but there it is. That is pure gold. Start to finish. Just being like, oh, judge us? No, I don't think so. He doesn't get to do that. He can cut our heads off, granted. But as for judgment, I don't think so. He does not count. That is not how he rolls. That's not how we roll. That's not his role in the universe, and nobody will believe it. Ugh, love it. Love it, love it, love it. So they all just follow Rashawn. Like, immediately. They're like, all right, yeah, this is the vibe we're going with. I'm here for it. And they passed through the door. The lower bowl of that huge elliptical cavern was empty, except for the warriors who blocked the many other entrances. And they see the shape of that king, and Nita starts to be like, oh God, this thing is so gross, and all of this is so creepy. The presence of the lone one was stronger than she'd thought. She could feel it sucking at her will as they got closer, as if it was trying to empty all the thoughts out of her brain. Every sense that she was herself, that she was anything but a slave, to do what she was told, to obey orders. She shook her head. There was something she was supposed to be doing, but she couldn't think what. Something jabbed her side. Neats! Her eyes went wide. Nita realized that she'd been walking toward the dais without even being aware of it. She glanced sideways and saw Kit looking at her in concern, but ready to elbow her again if necessary. You there? Yeah, thanks. Count inside your head or sing yourself a song or something. And she starts reciting a series of prime numbers and trying not to walk in rhythm. And this was something that I found interesting because it reminded me a little bit of the, oh my God, not The Wind in the Door. What's the original one? You guys know what I'm talking about. The Madeleine L'Engle book. And the fact that, like, when they go to see doing things in rhythm is too easy for it to fall into the pattern of the beat that it gives off, the pulse. So you have to kind of do things in an off-tempo way so as to not fall into the hypnotic effect. And this, like, just, I don't know, I really like that idea. You know, you can't just let your mind sort of go blank and rhythmic. You've got to focus on doing things in a disjointed way in order to keep yourself alert. And Nita desperately wanted to be farther away from it. I don't want to scream, she thought, but if anybody makes me go up to it, makes me touch it, I really don't want to scream. It'll just set Darine off. What a gigantic, ugly sack of crap, Darine said, in a tone of completely clinical interest. Truly disgusting. And would you look at the ugly, wiggly bits? But it's so deluded it still thinks everybody ought to be bowing and scraping to it. Isn't it beyond pathetic? Don't freeze up, Memeki. It's not worth your time. And I really like that Nita is like, you know what? I don't think she was just talking to Memeki. You know, the implication being that, like, her sister saw that she was beginning to fucking freak out and was like, don't worry, girl, I got you. Especially considering that Nita had just been thinking, I can't set Darine off because, you know, and meanwhile Darine is like, set me off. I don't give a shit about this fucking piece of crap. Love it. Love it. So, this is when the king tries to control Carmela. It thinks it's doing it. And like I said, I was pretty confident that it was not doing it. Memeki now stood swaying on her many legs, her eyes reflecting nothing but the king as she leaned more and more toward him. And he's talking about giving her freedom, and she's like, oh, the freedom to die. But if there's a freedom that you don't choose to grant, you won't give us that. You hold out hope with one claw and take it away with the other. I may be weak and doomed soon to die, but I will die as an eye, not just one more nameless scrap of shell to be thrown out into the sucking mud. Such a life, even a breath's worth of it, is better than anything you've ever given me. And eventually, he just says, well, they have spoiled you beyond tempting. What a shame. And I have hastened your time considerably. You can feel them preparing to come forth. This should be educational for these friends you're so enamored of. I can't tell you guys, it's like I didn't understand what he meant right away. I really didn't. I don't know how I'm this stupid, but what he's saying is, I'm going to get you eaten up by your own young in a moment. And once I realized that's what he meant, I was like, that is just not fair. Again, like, what the fuck? And this is when he looks over at Carmela. Why did they brought you along? Alien thing, come over here. To Nita's absolute horror, Carmela's arms suddenly flopped away from her body, jerking like the arms of a puppet on strings. Carmela wobbled, her balance lost, and her face went slack with shock as she took a step forward towards those nastily working jaws. Then she scowled, dug in her heels, and stopped again. Oh, resistance! How amusing! But you have no more power against me than that. Now come here. So she begins to walk toward him, and it really looks like she has been overpowered here. And then he says something about the weapon hidden on her. And just basically, like, what good does it do for you to have hidden it when your thoughts are not hidden? And that's the only thing that I found a little bit tricky here, is that it can see her thoughts and see that she hid this weapon, but it does not see that she isn't actually under its control. And I'm not entirely clear on why it can't tell that's what's going on. So she brings it out, and he's talking about like torturing her and letting her get eaten slowly while she's still like alive but frozen and not able to move. He's really hideous. And then he's like, oh, sweet, this weapon, after you wielded it, you can die on it, and that'll be perfect. And he's like mid-sentence, and she pulls the trigger. I love this so much. An awful singed hair stink of burning bug came billowing out from the dais through waves of greasy black smoke. And it was some seconds before this cleared enough for Nita to see that the king's entire front half had been blown away. Its rear half was now a smoking, bubbling, sagging bag of grossness, the sight of which made Nita simply bend over double and retch, mutely grateful that the soda she'd drunk was now too far along in her system to come back up. And Carmela just says, oops. And for a moment, it's like, oh shit, we're good. She killed it. And then they notice something. First, Memeki is beginning to convulse. It's bad. But secondly, they see something unfolding from the body of the king. And of course, it is the lone one. It turned around and looked at them. Oops, it said. It left the dais and stalked toward them. Oops. Carmela had sense enough to be unnerved. Sorry, she said. I rather doubt it, the lone one said. But that will change. And it grabs this and is about to make it blow up. And thankfully, Carmela can tell what is about to happen. And she chucks this weapon as far away from her as she possibly can. And thankfully, she's got a really good arm. It's mentioned that she was like on the softball team. So it's a distance away before it blows up. But it was almost going to like probably blow her up and whoever was standing next to her. I must confess that why you weren't more susceptible to control is an issue for curiosity. Might be that someone here was able to keep you from noticing, Ronan said. Maybe that's what it is. You know, I just said earlier that, like, why couldn't they see into her mind that she wasn't really being controlled? But that might be exactly what Ronan is saying the power was doing. And the lone power is just like, yeah, I doubt it. He hasn't got a lot of energy left in him. And then looks over at each of them. And I'm not going to go through the entirety of the lone one's speech here. But I will say, this, for me, was probably the least effective that the lone one has been so far for me. And I think the reasoning behind that is just, it went on too long. You know, we've had moments with the lone one where what he is saying or the fear that he's trying to tap into is extremely compelling and upsetting because of that, you know? Here, it just felt like the lone one was monologuing a series of the dastardly deeds it was going to do once they weren't able to stop it anymore, once it wasn't distracted with their interference anymore. And because I was so confident that our crew is going to get out of here, it felt like just kind of, yeah, wrap it up. Can we keep, like, I felt like it was just so much talk and very little action in comparison. Like, you know, there have just been a number of scenes where there has been a perfectly good reason why the Lone One is able to monologue. You know, for the last book, the Lone One had them trapped and was explaining the loophole that it exploited to get them to the center of this planet and then leave them there. And that made sense to me because we needed to understand exactly how this was all done. But it doesn't, like, here we know what's going on already. So we're not getting an explanation, an unraveling of like a small mystery. We're getting a to-do list. And that's like a lot less interesting when it's all hypothetical. When it's all like, well, as soon as I take over the universe, this will happen. Because I don't believe you're going to take over the universe. So it doesn't feel like a threat the same way. If maybe there was a different way of doing this that would feel a little bit more legit. But in the moment, I was genuinely shocked at how long the Lone One just keeps talking. That's like paragraph after paragraph of explaining how each part of the universe, each planet, each of their friends is going to be handled. And I was just kind of like, I don't need you to do this. For one thing I think that could have been done that would be slightly more interesting is the Lone One is like, you know what would be cool is if I just locked you onto this planet and left you wandering around to slowly starve to death. It would be probably pretty fun to watch that because y'all don't like have the metabolism to eat anything on this planet. So you'd definitely die, but it would be a little while. And I would just get to like observe your fucking suffering, which would be pretty good. What if the Lone One actually did that? Like actually separated them and actually, you know, and I get that then the ending that we wind up getting wouldn't be possible, but you figure out a way around that. You figure out a way for them to find their way back to each other. You do something. The villain monologue here, it just felt very inelegant compared to the way that the monologuing has gone in other books. And the one thing that I will say that he explains though, he mentions that Memeki waited too long to make up her mind. When I sealed wizardry away, she lost access to the power that would have allowed her to enact her transformation. It bothered me so much that Memeki is on the ground writhing around and he kicks her in this moment. I really wanted to strangle him for that. Any time that somebody gets kicked, I have, like, even when it's a bad guy, for some reason, kicking takes things to another level. And it feels so much more degrading, you know? And that's the point of it, really. But if the Hesper had been smart and stayed outside of so-called reality and timelessness, I'd have left it completely alone. But once it decided to meddle in what's going on inside physicality, it had to pass this test first, which always eventually attracts my attention, though this time it took a little more tracking down than usual. I've been expecting this move ever since my so-called redemption. The one didn't wait nearly as long as I thought it would. Its mistake. So no more Hesper. She's about to do what all good mothers on Rashad do. Die. And I'll have at least a few aeons more peace and quiet until the powers decide to try another stunt like this. And he says the powers have used up a ton of energy setting all of this up. And honestly, I've used a lot of energy up as well because I need to distract you all. It didn't entirely work, but you've done me a favor. Without all of you bringing Rasha to my attention, who knows whether I'd have been alerted to this problem right under my nose in time to do something about it. So the other powers have outsmarted themselves. And it'll be a long time before they feel like trying this again. And Ronan says, so are you going to just let the Polulus destroy everything? And the Lone One is like, no, I would never do that. Then there's nothing fun to watch on television, basically, is the assertion here. While they're trying to pick up the pieces, I can amuse myself with raising another king for the Commonwealth and watching all of you run around trying to survive on Rasha. Once I've got enough of them and I've given them the right technology, they should be able to overrun a significant portion of this universe. But present pleasures first. One early order of business will be to push the Polulus in tightly enough around your solar system to flare up Wallach's star. Your people always do react more hysterically to fire than to ice. Nita saw Rashawn go pale, but he kept his face stern. And I can use the same technique on your people, I suppose, it said, looking back at Philip. Kindler of wildfires, they call me. They won't have seen anything like this. The sun side of your planet will be one big charcoal briquette when I'm done. Your little friends, it frowned at Dareen, have unfortunately made themselves energy independent, but we'll see how much good that does them when one or two rogue planets collide with theirs from either side. And then, of course, Earth. The Polulus is doing such a lovely job there already, I won't have to do a single thing but watch. It's closing in on your helipaws already, and people's tempers are getting frayed. And he says, and I assume that this is a reference to 9/11, it's only a matter of hours before the big show begins. A fallen skyscraper or two will be nothing compared to what's coming up. Nice gloat, Kit said. You're too kind. I'm telling you the truth, which you pretend to so value. And Kit, denial, even disguised as humor, it suits you badly. Don't you understand? You're not getting out of it this time. This is what I mean. Right? Like here, it just started to feel like, yeah, we get it. You know, like honestly, Kit's nice gloat. It almost felt like the author acknowledging what was happening here. And I guess maybe this is supposed to be part of like the Lone One's character flaws, but it more felt like, okay, if you know that this is sort of like a lot, you could have pulled back on it and made this feel a little bit less ridiculous. But there it is. And let's see. Nita stood frozen with horror as she watched the heaving wrack mimic more and more terribly. That awful wave of desperation she'd felt in the crossings rose up to possess her again, and this time it stuck. Behind her, someone moved. Ronan pushed past Nita to stand in front of her. And Memeki. All right, he said, pausing to lean on the spear again. I don't know about everybody else here, but I for one think it's time somebody put some manners on you. And the Lone One says, you can't hurt me with that. Nobody, it's absolutely no good. The toothpick of virtue is what it's calling the spear. It's absolutely no good for anything without someone who knows both how to use it and who has the strength, which, as we've seen, you don't. You're right, Ronan said. I don't, but someone else does. And then the lone power. This, for me, was really the low point. You know, you missed your calling. Why aren't you in stand-up comedy? Really? Really? That's the line? Why aren't you in stand-up comedy? That's the line you went with here? I'm a little shocked. Because normally Diane Duane writes extremely effective confrontations with the Lone One. And this just in every place that it mattered fell flat for me. I was really surprised. The tempting of Memeki was like better, but still somewhat weak. And then in this moment, it just felt like, I don't know. It just felt really weak to me. Do you know what I'm saying? I just... So, he says, my little brother might be wearing fewer feathers this time, but you're an even worse embodiment for him than his last one. You've only once let him have access to his full power, and never again since. Since he had to commit fully to embodying inside you, he's stuck there whether he likes it or not. If he tried to leave, it'd kill you. And being a power of light, he'd never take that chance. No, Ronan said softly. He wouldn't. And Ronan chucks the spear, saying, "But I would." And the spear goes flying past the lone one, who, tries to defend himself, but the spear is not headed for him. And then loops around and heads back. Ronan threw his arms wide, a grandstanding gesture, a casually defiant flash of black against the dim heat of the hive, and the spear of light struck him in the chest, and he went down. And the lone one screams, and Nita is just like, that is not happening. This is absolutely not fucking happening. Ronan lay bleeding blood and fire, but a breath later, a wave of force blasting away from the light that pooled around him struck Nita and knocked her and all the others flat, even the lone power. In that shockwave, the fallen bodies of the arch-votary and its warriors were scattered across the floor. Once again, Nita understood why, long ago, the first thing such an apparition had to say to the people who saw it was, "Fear not." No sane and mortal creature could look on the One's champion in full manifestation without being afraid that mere fragile reality might start to shred around so terrible a power for good. "Free!" the champion cried. "Once again, brother, you underestimated the tenacity of the One's other weapons. This one in particular. I'm surprised you ever let him in here. But then this splinter of you seriously believed that the first work I did with Ronan was what I came to him for. And I thought there's only one thing I can do now. Thanks to him, it's the only thing that needs to be done. You've done everything else for us. You yourself triggered the whole cycle of events you most desired to avoid. So as you interrupted my work once before, now I interrupt yours, and what was trying to happen now has one last chance." That unbearable shard of light reared high, struck down. The words came rushing back right through her as the speech once again meant something. Her charm bracelet blazed. The rowan wand in her belt burned moonfire chill. She glanced around, saw the others scrambling up from where the shock wave had thrown them, regaining their power and their weapons. Nita looked up in shock and saw the dark shape of the lone one writhing on the floor like a tangle of shadowy snakes. And the champion is saying, "All right, guys, I did what I could, but the rest is on you because I just helped bring him down and bring magic back, but I haven't got any more energy left." And the lone one is looking like it's solidifying. And Nita's watching it like, fuck, okay, what are we going to do? She's looking at the spear. Nita reached to pull it out of him, then hesitated as its blade went up in a great flame of furious white fire. Kneeling across from Nita, the light of the spear glinting in his eyes, and a moment later she became aware of a darkness overshadowing her. She looked up. It was Memeki, with Rashawn and Dareen and Carmela and Philip all around her, helping keep her on her feet. And she says, she grabs the spear, because Ronan tells her, "This is made for you. Now you can." And then he seems to pass out. I think he's dead. And the lone power is saying this cannot happen. And Memeki is just like, you know what? I fucking had it. I am the Hesper. That's my answer. And she grabs the spear, and everything happens in silence, which I really like. Nita is expecting some shattering of sound, rumbling, thunder, whatever, and that's not how it is. And the darkness around them deepened. All that remained within the core of the light was a shell, transparent. The light itself fountained up into the heights of the central space of the city and then down again, sheeting and splashing out, illuminating that whole place and flooding outward. At first, Nita thought the walls were vanishing, but then she realized they were simply becoming as transparent as glass under the influence of the power that now imbued them. The chamber was full of Yaldiv now, thousands of them packed into this space. Her heart went up in a blaze of triumph, but this was what had to happen, and now all the Yaldiv, born and unborn, will be her avatars, all the Hesper's children, and not the lone ones. The rainbow light shivered and trembled to the sound of Paunch's barking, burning, glinting, like mirrors in the sun. The eyes of the great shelled shape above them looked down at Paunch, and at the wizards who stood or crouched to look up at her, and at the one wizard who lay still, even the blood pooled beside him reflecting rainbows now. "I am here," it said. "I am here at last." And she bows to them and thanks them for helping with this work, and says, my other self was maimed, but shall now be healed, and after it, in time, so will many other worlds. "It's going to take a long time," Doreen said. "It will take forever," the Hesper said. "But I have forever now." I really liked that line. Yeah, it'll take forever. Literally. That's like what forever's for. So, it's fine. I must withdraw into timelessness now and recoup my strength, or risk being unable to embody again for a long while. And Paunch is the one, everybody else is like, "We understand, we appreciate you." And Paunch is the one who's like, "No! Oh my God, don't go. Don't go, don't go, don't go." And the light faded, slipping away, and they all stood or knelt in twilight. So Nita goes and grabs her manual out of other space, which she couldn't even reach before. And she shakes out her wand, and she puts her hand on Ronan. And it's clear that what she is intending to do is administer first aid as soon as she can. But Ronan is already not breathing. And I just want to clarify that in my intro, I said that I kind of hope Ronan's actually dead. And this is something that comes up for me a lot. I want stories to have real consequences. And Diane Duane tends to be good about that. So one of my biggest pet peeves is when it seems like somebody's dead and that they've made this great sacrifice, and then it turns out that they are not. And that's not to say that I hold anything against characters in particular and want to see them dead. You guys know I fucking love Ronan. Like, I just very much was into Ronan. It's not anything about wanting him to be dead in particular. But if he made this sacrifice on purpose, I want it to be real. I want it to be a genuine sacrifice that they have to come to terms with and understand and respect for what it is, rather than, something that like the universe immediately takes it back because the goodness of what you did was enough. And so the sacrifice itself was your willingness to do it and not your actual life. Because for me, that doesn't hold a lot of water. Like, I think because of circumstances outside of what the characters know, it's not their fault. But as a reader and TV viewer, I know how often that trope happens. And so, even though it's not fair, and there's no reason that Ronan would know that he would survive, and I'm saying that in the circumstance that this was written hopefully differently than what it is, I'm watching it knowing this gets done all the time, and people wind up getting out of it. They wind up not actually having to make that sacrifice. They just have to be willing to make it. So the willingness to do it does not feel special anymore because there are so many stories where somebody is willing to. And again, it doesn't, like, that's not fair because Ronan in the story is sincerely making the sacrifice and does not expect to survive. But I'm just saying from my perspective, that just doesn't really work for me anymore. There might be some circumstances where it could still be pulled off and feel effective and satisfying. Like, I personally don't really get down with it anymore. I need there to be a genuine consequence. It just doesn't feel meaningful if there's not. So if Ronan is still alive, I'm just going to be a little disappointed. And that's not, again, anything against Ronan. I really like him. And, like, I don't really want him dead. But I will be sad that there's no lasting sort of tragedy, because it feels like something of this scale that they were fighting for, having absolutely no real losses on their side is so easy and so tidy. And I don't want it to feel that way. I want it to feel like they had to do something hard and real, you know? So like I said, I kind of believe that he's actually dead, but we shall see. So yeah, that is that. Jacob, I'm sorry, I didn't even see your comment. Jacob says, it's interesting to reread the first book because it really seems like Diane Duane was shooting her shot back in 1983. It's not her first novel, but I don't think she'd written any sequels yet. That's fair. I mean, I remember crying at the finale of the first book. So I'd be willing to believe that. Like I said, maybe she just realized, like, okay, it's time. Magic has always worked. What if it didn't? And we'll do that. But I thought that was really effective. It's just a shame that once the Lone One shows up, it felt like the drama became too cartoony. It was just too over the top. And I wasn't feeling the tension the same way anymore. Like, that's not usually an issue with these books. I tend to feel it. But here we are. So we'll see what the next couple of chapters are like, though. So, all right, guys, I'm going to wrap up. But thank you again very much to Yama for commissioning this. I hope you're enjoying the coverage. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.